Hello, my dear friends. This week's Haftarah tells a very beautiful story with profound lessons about human nature, about greed, selfishness, self-deception, and lashon hara. The Haftarah is about Arba Mitzorayim, the four lepers. We translate tzaras as leprosy, but it's not a real exact translation. Leprosy, tzaras is some type of skin affliction which miraculously was prevalent in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, and I'm sure you know that tzaras was a punishment for speaking lashon hara. A person would speak lashon hara, God would punish the person who would develop tzaras. So there were these four Mitzorayim that were outside the Jewish camp, and that's because a Mitzorah is Tameh, and he's not allowed to come into the camp of the Jewish people. Why were these people afflicted with tzara? So you have to go back a little bit earlier in the Navi. This is in Sefer Malachim, and you have to know the story that we would have read if this week Tazriah Umetzorah were split in two. If this year, we would have read Tazriah separate from Umetzorah. There's another Haftarah that we would have read in Umetzorah, in Tazriah, that sets the story for what transpires in this week's Haftarah. So here's the story that we didn't read, but we read other years we read it, and that is a story about Gehazi. Gehazi was the servant of Elisha, and Elisha was a Navi, and he was also a miracle worker. There was a king, and there was a general in the army of Aram. His name was Naaman, and he was afflicted by tzaras, and he was at wit's end to find a cure. And a maidservant who worked in his house told him he should go see Elisha. So he went to see Elisha, and Elisha told him, "Go, be toivel, go immerse yourself in the Yarden." At first, Naaman didn't want to listen. Why was the Yarden better than the rivers in Damascus? In the end, though, he was convinced. Give it a try. So he goes and he's toivel, and miraculously his tzaras completely disappears. And he was so moved. Naaman became a believer in Hashem, and he said, "Hineni no yadati." Now I know ki ein elokim b'chol haaretz ki b'Yisrael. There is no other God besides the Jewish God. Naaman had a tremendous sense of gratitude, wanted to reward Elisha for his services, and Elisha basically told Naaman, "I'm a Navi. They don't charge for their services. We don't charge for performing miracles," and he refused to accept any gifts. But Elisha had a servant by the name of Gehazi, who was an opportunist, and Gehazi saw an opportunity here to make some money, and become wealthy. So Gehazi, after Elisha refused the offer of Naaman to be rewarded, Gehazi secretly ran after Naaman, and he said, there are two people that just came to my master, and they are in need of financial assistance. Could you help? And Naaman was more than happy to do so, not realizing that Gehazi had fabricated this story. And so Naaman gave Gehazi some silver talents and other things, and Gehazi hid these things. He came back to Elisha, and Elisha said, "What did you do?" And he said, "I didn't do anything." He says, "I know exactly what you did. I'm a prophet." And he told Gehazi that because of the crime that you committed, the tzaras that afflicted Naaman will now be transferred to you. The beginning of this week's Haftarah speaks about the Arba Mitzorayim, the four Mitzorayim, so that were camped outside the Jewish community. Chazal said, who are these four Mitzorayim? They were Gehazi, the same Gehazi, who was the servant of Elisha, and his three sons. So Gehazi was afflicted with tzaras. So the first thing I just want to explain is that why was Gehazi afflicted by tzaras? Tzaras is a punishment for lashon hara. Gehazi didn't speak lashon hara about Elisha, so why was he afflicted with tzaras? So the answer is, obviously, because lashon hara doesn't have to be verbally expressed. You don't have to say that so-and-so is a no-good. If you do something that creates a disparaging view of a person and destroys their reputation, that's lashon hara. So what Gehazi had done was he took a situation where Elisha made a kiddush Hashem, he performed a miracle, and Naaman, not only was he so impressed with his miraculous ability to take away the tzaras, but also by his humility and his unwillingness to profit from the miracle, his integrity, and then basically Gehazi destroyed that, because Gehazi showed that no, you could, if you do miracles, you could take money for it, and Elisha felt that was a chil Hashem, because now it seems as if the prophets are in it for them, even though Gehazi claimed that he needed it for somebody else, but still, it was a way of profiting from the miracle. It reminds me of a story I was once in a cemetery for Levaya, and there was, after the Levaya was over, I was standing near my car, and somebody approached me with his wife, and they said, he has yard site, can I come to their grave, the grave of their parent, and say a psalm? So I said, okay. So they drove me to where the grave was. I spent maybe 10-15 minutes saying some Tehillim, and then he wanted to pay me. I said, no, I don't do this for payment. Absolutely not. It's not unnecessary. So when he drove me back to my car, the whole time he kept on saying to his wife, I never saw a rabbi like that. Can you believe it? The rabbi doesn't want any money. It was obvious. I don't know if he ever met a rabbi before in his life, but he had met, in the cemetery, he had met these people who, I guess they stay in the cemetery. This is how they earn a livelihood. So they are in the cemetery in order to say Tehillim for people who don't know enough to say Tehillim on their own, and they charge for their services, $50, $100. So I was like, he said, this is the first time I ever met a rabbi that doesn't charge. So Naaman was so impressed with Elisha, and Gehazi destroyed Elisha's reputation, so to speak. And that, even though he didn't speak Lashon Hara, but that was the same as Lashon Hara, because Lashon Hara is where you destroy a person's reputation. Okay, that's an introduction for what happens in this week's Haftarah. This week's Haftarah, there was a siege in the Shomron that was being, there was a king of Aram, his name was Ben Hadad. He laid siege on the Jewish community in the Shomron, and there was an enormous famine, and the price of food was skyrocketed, and there was not enough food available, and the famine was so terrible. The Navi says that when the king of the Jewish people, who was Yehoram, when he was walking through the neighborhood, there was a woman that called out to him, and she said, Hoshia Adoni HaMelech, save me, my king. And he said, what should I do to save you? So he thought she wanted some food to eat. So he says, no, but what happened was, my neighbor and I made a deal. Our children died, and we ate the bodies. Could you believe it? They were in such desperation. Starvation makes a person do crazy things. They lose their mind. We ate the body of my son, and then we agreed that tomorrow we'll eat the body of my neighbor's son. And now it came the next day, and my neighbor is refusing to let me eat her son's body, and that's why she asked the king to intervene. That's how terrible the famine was. So the Haftarah begins by saying that there were these 4 Mitzrayim outside the Jewish camp. They were outside the Jewish camp because a Mitzvah is not allowed to go into the city where the Jews are living, so because they're tamei, they're impure, halachically. So they were outside the camp, and here there was starvation ravaging the Jewish community of Shomron, and these 4 Mitzrayim, they came upon the enemy camp of Ben Hadad, the king of Aram. And they said to themselves, what if we're going to stay where we are, we're going to die from starvation. So we might as well go to the camp of Ben Hadad, throw ourselves at their mercy. If they kill us, they kill us. But either way, our lives are in danger. So they go to the camp, and lo and behold, there's not a single person in the camp, because the night before, Elisha had prophesied that there was going to be a miracle. God made it sound like there was a tremendous invasion by mercenary troops to attack Ben Hadad and his army, and the army, they fled, and they left everything behind. The food was still on the fire probably, and they didn't take anything with them, and there was strewn along the road. There was food and clothing, and so they didn't know why that had happened, but they saw there was not a single person left in the enemy camp. And so what did they do? What was their immediate reaction? They said, "Wow, this is great. Let's feast." So they went into the tents and they ate, and they went to another tent and they ate again, and they had the best food. And then they started gathering together gold and silver and fancy clothing. What a fabulous opportunity. Then it dawned upon them after a while that perhaps they are going to get into trouble. They said, well, when the king finds out that the enemy absconded, then if they catch us, we will be punished. The Rashi says, and the Mefarshim say, we would punish by Yehoram, the Jewish king, for not telling anybody that, because this provided salvation for the entire Jewish community. So they reluctantly went back and they informed the king that Yehoram that what they had observed. And first, the king thought that it was a trap, but in the end, it was discovered that they were telling the truth, and the Jewish community was saved from starvation. So the lesson to be learned here is that look at the mentality of the Arba Mitzrayim, of these 4 Mitzrayim. Gehazi, who was one of the 4, he was the father with his 3 sons. He became a Mitzrayim because he didn't think about the consequences of what he had done. He was such a he was so self-centered that didn't he realize that Elisha would know that he had taken the after Elisha told Gehazi not to take anything from Naaman. Why would and Gehazi had observed how Elisha performed miracles. So why did Gehazi ignore the instructions of Elisha, and he went and he took money from Naaman, which resulted in his being cursed by Gehazi, and it developed leprosy? It's because a human being has a tremendous capacity for self-deception. When a person is greedy and a person is self-centered, then they could distort all of reality. So here, Gehazi had learned nothing from his tzaras. The purpose of tzaras is not simply a punishment, but it's so a person should realize that what they have done that is wrong. When a person speaks lashon hara and they get tzaras, it's to motivate the person to do tshuva. So Gehazi should have realized that he did a terrible thing, and he harmed, he hurt, impugned the reputation of Elisha. Instead, he learned nothing because he remains self-centered to the end, and he goes into the camp, and a normal person, with the people were starving to death. The famine was so extreme to the extent where I just told you the story from the Navi, that the women are fighting with each other whose corpse they should eat, and they wanted the king's assistants to help them. Hoshia Adoniam, save me, Adoniam Melech, my master the king, because my neighbor's not letting me eat her son. We ate mine, now So it was just astounding, the level of deprivation that existed. And you would think that the first thing that they would do, these Arba Mitzrayim, would be they would run to let the Jews know, that their brethren, to know that there's salvation and there's food and drink. Instead, they spent the evening filling their pockets and having a blast. And it's a powerful example of self-absorption, how a person could be so self-centered and not think at all of the consequences, how it affects other people. And it really, that gives us a framework to understand lashon hara, because lashon hara could destroy people. It's devastating. And I over the course of the last 4 decades that I'm in Highland Park, there are many times when I have seen people's reputations be destroyed by others, and people have been in tremendous pain and enormously hurt. And I'm sure that the people that spoke Lashon Hara didn't mean to do so, but the reason why it happens is because people, when they get upset and they're absorbed in the situation, they don't pay attention to the bigger picture. They don't think about that. I could cause I could hurt the person's marriage. I could affect the children of the person in the yeshiva that they're in, or they're not able to get into because of my lashon hara. I could have disastrous impact on the person. Nowadays, with especially with social media, that it is so dangerous. The things that you put out. There are people that have committed suicide because of social bullying. It's so powerful in a negative way, lashon hara, and it could destroy people's lives. But when people speak lashon hara, they're oblivious to the consequences. Why? Because they're just absorbed in themselves. And the story of Elisha and his 4 sons, and 3 sons, the Arba Mitzrayim, is a super powerful example of to what extent self-deception could play a role, and how it could completely distort a person's view of what's happening and blind the person to being aware of the consequences of what is happening. I saw in a sefer, he pointed out that the Chafetz Chaim was the modern prophet, so to speak, about lashon hara. He was the one that devoted his life to promoting the importance of not speaking lashon hara. He wrote the sefer Shmiras Halashon, and since the Chafetz Chaim died almost 100 years ago, but there's been so much focus on not speaking lashon hara, and there's been groups and shiurim as a result of Chafetz Chaim. And there never was, before the Chafetz Chaim, there never was such a comprehensive sefer on lashon hara, both religiously, morally, halachically. The Chafetz Chaim sefer on lashon hara is just spellbinding. So he says, why did God orchestrate that in our generation there should be a Chafetz Chaim? He says because the power of sharing information today is so much more dangerous than it was in the past. The Chafetz Chaim wrote it at a time where they didn't have social media and they didn't have email. So, but even then, there were telephones and with modern communications, and the mail system was much more sophisticated than it was years earlier. It used to be you wrote a letter to your family in Europe. It took 2 years to get there. So, the Jewish world needed a Chafetz Chaim to deal with the problems, and if that was true, the Chafetz Chaim died 90 years ago, it's true 10,000 times more or whatever today, where social media is so ubiquitous and it's so easy. You just write one sentence, you could destroy a person. And it's so important to think about, read the Haftarah carefully and see how the description, I shared it with you, you've probably seen it before, but read it again and see how insulated Gehazi and his children are after being punished with Saras, and he should have learned the lesson, but how he's oblivious to what's going on in the world around him. And that should serve as a tremendous constant reminder of how careful we have to be with things that come out of our mouths. Thank you for listening, and have a good Shabbos.